welcome to the program. This is Vivica Williams, and you're watching Head to Head. In this program, we want to take a look back at 2017 at business development events inside Ukraine. We'll talk about the successes and setbacks and what to expect for 2018. Joining us in the studio today is James Brooks, the editor-in-chief of Ukrainian Business Journal. Jim, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Vivica.
So let's talk about 2017. Sure. And what are some of the successes that we can say were definite successes for Ukraine in the business world?
Yeah. I'll throw out two, a little unexpected, I'd say China and the U.S. The U.S. is maybe easier for people to understand. The U.S. has an export agency called OPIC, and the man who took over made his first trip out of 150 countries to Ukraine. Oh, wow. That was last August. And 3 months later, he approved a $500 million loan and insurance program to underwrite a 500 megawatt wind farm, which is precisely on the path that Putin would have taken for this land bridge between Mariupol and Crimea. So basically, the U.S. is planting a $500 million investment flag smack on the Sea of Azov, smack in the path of what would have been the land corridor linking Donetsk and Crimea. And then a week later, his board approved $250 million for this nuclear spent fuel processing plant, storage plant in Chernobyl. So those are really big endorsements of Ukraine, real bets. The second thing, which people never talk about, is totally low profile, is China. And China is basically ignoring Moscow and is quietly investing in infrastructure. And let's start with dredging the port of Yuzhny, the busiest port on the Black Sea in Ukraine, is being dredged by China. They want to dredge Chornomorsk. They've got a contract to build a bridge over the Dnieper. Wow. They're building Ukraine's first Betonka, which will be an all-cement highway for grain trucks between Mykolaiv and Odessa. And as some of us know here in Kyiv, they've won the contract and they will be financing to build Kyiv's fourth metro line. Oh, wow. So the Chinese are all doing this pretty quietly. They're very pragmatic. They're following their own interests, but their interests involve ignoring what their so-called allies in Moscow would be telling them, which is to stay away from Ukraine. So that's, I think, very significant, those two countries, what China and the U.S. are doing here. Oh, wow. So this is really great connections and new business things that we're going to see developing immediately in the next year. Right. And Vivica, I mean, the other thing we should, kind of the elephant in the living room, is the European market. Yes. And two really important things happen. One is free trade. The FTA fully came into effect. And the BSVs, the no visa travel for 90 days to the European Union, I think will really mix things up and expose a lot of Ukrainians to life in the West. Obviously, a lot will go there and take temporary jobs. But it's also prompted Ukrainian employers to raise their salaries. Right. So we've seen salaries go up about 30% in real terms in 2017. That's good news. So this is great. So we see that this is creating some competition. Businesses in Ukraine are seeing that they've got to try to retain their employees. Yeah. And also, we were talking about this goes great as a hand-in-hand with the free trade, with the without visas, free visa movement, so that you can see this growth in businesses. They're able to go to conferences to really do these business exchanges. Exactly. And we've seen this fall in Kyiv a real upsurge in the business conferences. If you talk to the Hilton, the Hyatt, the Intercon, they've done pretty well compared to previous years. And there's been this upsurge in air connections to the West. Amazing. There are no flights to Russia anymore. But air traffic is up 30%. Lviv, for the first time since independence, recorded 1 million passengers. Oh, wow. There are a lot of new destinations, not just down to the warm spots down in Egypt or Israel and Turkey, but west to new destinations in Europe. And ideally, this will expose Europeans to Ukraine. It'll be a two-way street. And we also see that Ukraine's opening an low-cost airline. Start next week. That's a good. Infrastructure Minister Omelian is very busy promoting new destinations, new airlines, and we see the result that air traffic is up by about 1/3 this year. Oh, wow. And speaking of that, we talk now kind of a bit about the setbacks. So talking about airlines, that's a really big one for us as well with Ryanair. Right, Vivek, exactly. Ryanair was really a psychological blow. because, Wizz Air has maybe increased their destinations by 50%. So there's a lot of cheap flights that are opening up to the West. But Ryanair is obviously a big trademark, and they're very loud and well-publicized. Pulling the plug on the Ukraine operation was a blow, and it sent a message of a big question mark over Ukraine, and that was a real blow, I thought. Another setback this year, maybe a little not so exciting to readers, but the loss of access to coal from the occupied areas. It's all very nice that the U.S. is sending coal and South Africa is sending coal, but we all know that if you move coal halfway around the planet, it's going to be more expensive than just shipping it from existing train lines. So that hurt. And I think what also is hurting is that the reform program is kind of running out of steam. And, we need the anti-corruption court, a free land market, farmland market.
These are all very difficult topics that have been not getting any better in 2007. We've seen a lot of setbacks in both of those.
And we're not seeing the IMF money, which is basically very low. It's almost like free money, and the country could do with it. And when the IMF comes in, other investors, private sector investors, feel better about the country, et cetera, et cetera.
And so this is going to, even though Prime Minister Grossman has said he's looking at growth next year and forecasting this positive growth, what we're seeing this year, are you seeing that may be just positive thinking if we're not seeing the changes that will lead to it?
I think this year the coal boycott kind of took the bloom off the rose in the first quarter, and things never really kind of got going again. I think there'll be 2% growth this year. Next year, the Prime Minister and others are saying 3% growth. I would not be surprised a bit more. Don't forget that 2018 is a pre-election year. It's essentially an election year. The election will be in March. And what governments around the world, they save up their war chests and then they start spending it. So by the end of the year, and whether it's Obama trying to do this or President Poroshenko trying to do this, after a good year, people start thinking nicer things about the government. So we may see 3%, we may see 4% growth. That would be great.
Oh, that would be excellent. And one thing we didn't talk about in positive things was the free trade agreement with Canada that started in August. And there's a lot of hope, a lot of anticipation for that, a lot of hope. So how do you consider that?
Well, I think it's great. I love Canada. I've been there many times. I worked there. And the great advantage for Ukraine is there's a very strong Canadian diaspora there.
Absolutely.
A Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. Same size in the U.S., but they have much more influence inside Canada. So they've done workshops on promoting trade and bringing Ukrainian businessmen to Toronto and vice versa. And they've got this QTIS, which is promoting bilateral trade. So they're working very hard on getting things like Ukrainian jams into Canadian supermarkets. And it's doable. So
but you're thinking is the market is not as large, or is this not as promising?
The main stage is Europe, and we Americans like to think that the U.S. is really number one. Really, number one is the 500 million consumers in the inside the European Union, and it is the world's richest and largest market. And Ukraine has this incredible advantage of their own FTA with Europe, which is there's a land border. Most of the EU is within 2 days of train or truck from Western Ukraine.
Much easier having this next door trade.
So that is going to be the big play, I think, is how that FTA evolves. And I have good hopes for the future.
And let's talk a little bit about things that we were looking forward to in 2017 but didn't materialize.
Well, having covered as a reporter NAFTA, which is the deal between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada, I expected what Ross Perot said, a great big sucking sound of jobs moving from Europe to Western Ukraine. It frankly didn't happen. 40,000, 45,000 auto parts jobs, that's good. What we are seeing is some of the factories are moving from the border area of Lviv towards the center to Vinnytsia, Zhytomyr. That's good. I think Americans know Mexico, and I checked 3% of Americans visited Mexico, as 9 million people last year. If 3% of Germans visited Ukraine, that would be 2.4 million Germans coming here. That didn't happen. It's maybe 60,000 Germans. So Europeans still have not been here. Now, that may change a little bit with this Federations Cup, the big football championship in May, and with all these cheap flights. I think you're going to get more and more European tourists coming to discover Ukraine, and that's great. Just coming here, Kyiv and Lviv and Odessa, they sell themselves. They're great cities.
We saw with Eurovision, which is also a big thing. But this is a very specific type of people who come for Eurovision. It's a smaller group, but you know, when they did surveys of this group, they found, you know, they asked people what their thoughts were about Ukraine, what they knew about Ukraine beforehand, which majority said it was about the war, and then afterwards, what they found, which was the hospitability of people. And 97% said they returned. So now we're looking ahead. Let's already talk about forecast for 2018.
You know, let's go to the football cup. But with Eurovision, some Ukrainians say, oh, only 20,000 came, but something like 2 million watched. So for every live body on the streets in Krashatik, there were 10,000 watching on TV. So that is massive PR, and I think we'll see that with Federation Cup.
And speaking of 2008 and this Federation Cup, this is, you're going to have millions more watching this. And we're going to have, you know, so many more coming to this.
It's going to be kind of funny because they're expecting, I think, 400 chartered planes to converge on Kyiv. And there are going to be so many, they're going to be sending some to Odessa to park them for the night. They're going to be parking some in Gostomel, Antonov's airport in northwest Kyiv. So there's going to be this real sort of charter gridlock of airplanes bringing people in for the weekend, and I think it'll be fun.
And we also see at this time, this is when SkyUp should have got worked out their kinks by the time of this coming up.
They'll be up and running by April, and I'm sure it's no accident they'll be running by April because the big party will be in mid-May.
And so let's talk then a little bit more about some forecasts and expectations for 2018.
Well, I'm hoping, maybe my hope is that the Europeans will move to opening more factories here. What's happened is the companies that are already in Ukraine, they get it, and they can persuade their boards, let's go from 2 factories to 3. Now, we haven't seen that much of the new companies coming in. So I'm hoping that the word about Ukraine is a great place to invest. I'm hoping that that will spread and that people will start coming in. Don't forget, NAFTA, in the early years, there was 1 new American company opening in northern Mexico every day.
Oh, wow.
It was a huge movement. And so, you know, if Ukraine could just get 10% of that action, it'd be great.
And also, I've seen an announcement recently that Uber plans to open a branch here. I think
they've opened their regional headquarters in Podol.
So hopefully we're going to see more of this, and not as as most people think of Ukraine as an IT outsource, but to actually have other types of industry really opening up.
Well, we're actually doing a story in IT for the UBJ, Ukrainian Business Journal, moving from outsourcing to R&D. And more of that is happening. More R&D is happening. And I talked to a guy who runs a sort of outsourcing company, a Ukrainian American, and he said that increasingly Ukraine is very much appreciated as where you can put together small, smart teams of engineers and develop new things. So,
and this is the thing that Ukraine is, as you said, trying to move towards, is more of creating its own versus being the powerhouse for some other company.
No, I think that's happening. And we haven't talked about agriculture, but 42% of exports are food, farm goods. So Ukraine is asserting itself as a food power, a world food power. It's quite impressive. And it already has displaced the United States as the #1 supplier of corn to China. And there's some thinking that maybe in about 20 years it could actually displace the U.S. as the #1 grain exporter in the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And just speaking specifically for a minute, I know that France had a lot of apprehension about Ukraine having this free trade agreement because of Ukraine being such a powerhouse in agriculture. Do you see anything, any issues coming up with this for next year?
Well, that's as old as the EU, that the EU is protecting French and German farmers. That said, the government has gotten bigger quotas, and Ukraine is the #1 supplier of honey to Germany, But the big ticket items are going in at greater amounts. On the other hand, there's a lot of very aggressive salesmanship going on, selling grains to the Mideast, to China. The Chinese have to feed whatever it is, 1.3 billion people, and that's why they're locking in these harvests and building these roads and building their silos and dredging the ports. They want to make sure Ukraine is in shape to get the grain out in the world market. So Europe is important, and exports to Europe are up, way up. But, there's a lot of other alternatives out there.
And there was also an announcement recently about the U.S. Announcing that Ukraine could lose in 4 months its special trade status.
Yeah.
How important do you see this being for Ukraine?
I think it's kind of a shot across the bow. It was done in a very sort of veiled way. We don't know which advantages are going to be lost. I think it's sort of a warning. And, that's the game of international trade. People are always jousting and trying to get the best deal they can. So I'm not too worried about that, really. I mean, this is also coming when the lethal weapons was approved, and, we're talking about Javelin missiles and these sniper rifles coming in. So
it's hard and it's also hard to predict with the U.S. and the Trump administration where things are going to fall.
Well, if you go back a year, we were all kind of gnawing our fingernails because Trump seemed to be Vladimir Putin's best buddy, and I think 1 year later, he's sending sniper rifles and Javelin missiles, and it's very clear that the Democrats, because they feel the Russians stole the election, and the Republicans, because they're traditionally skeptical of Russia, that there's a really bipartisan agreement, not just anti-Kremlin, but pro-Ukraine.
Right, absolutely. And so are there any takeaways or things that you'd like our viewers to think about or to expect for the upcoming year?
Well, I do hope that the FTA with Europe will be implemented. There'll be more investment and there'll be better jobs here. I think a key thing to watch is the air traffic. Are people coming here? Are people realizing it? I mean, I had lunch with a guy from the U.S. Embassy, and he said they get a 25% hardship post for living in Kyiv, which is totally ridiculous.
So if that disappears, we know then that things are
I mean, we're 10 hours by train from the front line, and Kyiv's a delightful city to live in. And he was kind of smirking, and free money, why turn it away? But we know. But he did say that he'd been in Colombia before, and his family was more concerned about him coming to Ukraine than to Colombia.
Wow. And I'm sure if they visited and they've been here, they definitely change their minds.
Well, he's going to invite them, yeah.
Thank you so much for this insight, Jim.
Great. Thank you, Vivek. It's been great.
And today we're speaking with James Brooks, Editor-in-Chief of Ukrainian Business Journal, about forecast for 2018 here in Ukraine. Thank you for watching.